I stopped thinking of myself as like a quarter Chinese, a quarter Indonesian, like really mathematically dividing myself because I think that's really reductive. Like I am all Indonesian. I'm also all Chinese. I'm also all Cambodian. And I think owning that and being able to say that to yourself is a way of self-accepting that, you are those things, even if it's a different way of being it than other people. Like you're still completely those things and nobody can take that from you.
Welcome to OC Hues, a podcast where we learn to connect through a palette of views, colors, and a diverse community of people from various ethnic backgrounds. We're highlighting meaningful Asian American voices, stories, and experiences of key community members and leaders to reclaim visibility.
Hey everyone, I'm Tiffany from Southland, pronouns she, her, and hers.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh from KCS, pronouns he, him, his.
Welcome everyone, I'm Sam from OCAPICA, pronouns she, her, and hers. Hello everyone, welcome back to OC Hues. Thank you for joining us for another episode. I am honored to introduce our next guest. From working in OCAPICA's mental health department to exploring race relations, cultural interactions through Asian American studies, please give a warm welcome to Nikki.
Woo! Hello, everyone. My name is Nikki, last name Oei. I use she, her pronouns. And like Sam said, I work in the mental health field, have been working in the field for a year and a half now, I think. And I have my bachelor's and master's in Asian American studies.
Yep. All right. So Nikki, thank you for coming. We're glad to have you here. And for listeners at home, let's start off by getting to know you and your origins. So your last name is Oei. Where does it come from?
Yeah, so it is a Chinese Indonesian name. And I guess like the fun fact of it is it is a made up name to a certain degree. The original last name would be something like Wang or Hong. But because of the long history of Chinese and Indonesian interactions, a lot of Chinese Indonesians actually changed their names either to be more similar to names in Arabic or names like mine, which are a little bit kind of strange sounding, I think. So Oei, Gooey, I've seen Oei with two O's, a lot of different variations that are pretty similar. So it's a very common name, but also a completely uncommon name out here in the US.
So you touched on something that was really important, that I think you're of mixed heritage. You said Chinese, Indonesian, I think Malaysian and Cambodian, right?
I am Chinese, Thai, Cambodian, Indonesian, and yes, yeah. I think I get them all. Yes. So related to Malay, but I'm not Malay myself.
Okay, so Can you give us a little more of your family history, like about your roots?
Yeah, so I was born and raised here in the US, born, raised 626 San Gabriel Valley, if that means anything to you. And now I'm out here in Orange County, but both sides of my family are refugees to a certain degree. My mom is Chinese Thai. My grandma's Thai, but my grandfather, Cambodian and Thai. My grandmother's Thai, my grandfather is Cambodian or Khmer. And so they came in the 80s after the Khmer Rouge. And then my father's side is Chinese Indonesian, so many generations in Indonesia that I don't really know how far back it goes. But we are Teochew Chinese, I know that, and Indonesian too. And his family came in the 70s after there also were some massacres that were happening in Indonesia. So a lot of people came here for economic prosperity and freedom as well. And so yeah, that's how my parents got here. My mom, I think, has lived in a couple different states. She was, I think, settled in Texas and then stayed in Stockton with like kind of a third of the Khmer people that live out here. And then made her way down to, I believe she settled in La Puente, California. And then my dad's family kind of stayed in Pasadena, California. And they met at a vet clinic and had me and my 3 siblings and my 1 million cousins as well.
Well, Nikki, so it sounds like you're pretty mixed. I'm actually mixed as well. I'm half Filipino, half Vietnamese. And this is something I've struggled with, but do you ever feel like you have to balance your ethnic identity? Or how do you successfully balance it? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel that a lot, especially because I come from identities that are kind of all within Southeast Asia, but very different heritages and histories. And I think oftentimes when I talk about being Southeast Asian, people cling on to Cambodian because that's what a lot of people are familiar with, right? When you talk about Southeast Asia, it's like Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos because of histories with the US. But I think the really interesting thing that happens in my family is that my ethnic identities and which ones I kind of lean more into are different depending on where I am. So I was talking to my siblings about this past weekend because we were finally celebrating Lunar New Year. And I'm lucky enough to have come from an area where there are a lot of Indonesians, which is not common. There are not a lot of us in the US. And so growing up, I always kind of more identified with that because there were just more of us out there. And then after I moved to Orange County, we kind of don't have much of a presence. And I think ethnically, I look a lot more like my Cambodian side. And so more often people are clinging to that, especially as I'm in the Asian American nonprofit sector, and we have amazing Cambodian organizations out here. So oftentimes people kind of recognize like my identity more than they do my Indonesian one. And I've kind of learned to be okay with that. And I think part of that is understanding that for me, I don't know if you feel this way, Tiffany, all of my ethnic identities are going to inherently be like fusion. Like I like to think of myself as always going to be a fusion dish. Because I grew up, always being Khmer, but also having understanding that I'm also Indonesian, also Thai, also Chinese, which adds so many different layers. And so the dishes I eat, even the languages that my parents speak, always fuse in ways. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, there's a dish that is very common in the Khmer community, ka, which is typically made with like sugar and soy sauce. But my mom always made it with an Indonesian ingredient called kicap manis because we had it in the house because my dad was Indonesian. And so even the ways that I understand being Khmer are like inherently fused to my other identities. But it also came with hardships. Like I remember being in college and not wanting to join like the Khmer organizations because I felt like I wasn't Khmer enough. And I also didn't feel like Asian enough because I'm from, Southeast Asian communities. And then there's, an understanding often in the US of Asian being very East Asian. And so, all these like questions of belonging happen. But I think as I've grown older and I found the communities and I've reconciled what those mean for myself, I've been more at peace with people clinging to one part of my identity or not seeing another side because at least I know it's there and that's what matters.
Yeah, I totally relate with that because when I'm immersed in like my respective groups, I don't feel Filipino enough or Vietnamese enough. Like for instance, at work, Southland is very Vietnamese based. Mm-hmm. I don't speak or understand the language, but my last name, I always joke around, is the most Vietnamese part of me because my last name's Nguyen. And then when I'm with my Filipino like family or like groups, I feel more at home just because I look more Filipino. So they're a lot more accepting and I actually understand the language. And so I could converse like conversationally. But when I'm at home with like my family who's, understands that we're mixed, it is very fusion. Our food is, a lot of my dad's cooking or my mom's cooking. They kind of fused it together and that's all I know. But when I'm immersed into these communities, it's kind of like, oh, you're not enough. Mm-hmm. And so what advice would you give for other people who don't feel included or accepted into their ethnic groups?
I have two pieces of advice. I stopped thinking of myself as like a quarter Chinese, a quarter Indonesian, like really mathematically dividing myself, because I think that's really reductive. Like I am all Indonesian. I'm also all Chinese. I'm also all Cambodian. And I think owning that and being able to say that to yourself is a way of self-accepting that, you are those things, even if it's a different way of being it than other people. Like you're still completely those things and nobody can take that from you. And then the second thing I think is learning to be okay with the fact that people aren't going to understand your story unless they sit down and ask about it like you all are. And being okay with, gently correcting people or knowing when to pick your battle. I grew up in a also very Filipino community. And to this day, I still get people thinking that I am Filipina. Actually got asked to do like the Tagalog translations while working at OCAPICA. And I had to be like, no, I don't speak that. So, like things like that, correcting the assumptions, but also knowing when it's just okay to say like, people aren't going to get me. And that's okay. And that also comes with being okay with that because you accept yourself. So once you reach that point, then I think it's a little easier to let go of some of the bitterness that comes with not feeling enough.
No, that's great advice. Thank you. It sounds like you're very accepting and that you love being mixed. What's some of your favorite things about being multicultural?
I think the food aspect. The way, for example, I mentioned before, Cambodian foods aren't necessarily known for being sweet, but Indonesian foods are. So that's kind of translated into how my mom cooks. And when I go to other places, I kind of judge how unsweet their food is. So really getting the best of the culinary histories of my cultures, especially because I'm myself a really big foodie. That's, I think, a big one. I have so many holidays. It's actually kind of exhausting and really expensive. I celebrate 3 different New Years every single year. Khmer New Year, which is in April, Lunar New Year, which is January, February, and then Western New Year. So having all these different holidays that I get to attach to is really great because it means more family time, which for me is really important. I don't always know the histories of the celebrations we do, but I just go with it because I think those are ways that I get to connect with my cultures and with my family. And then also, I think the biggest benefit is I really love bringing people into my world, like showing people Indonesian food, showing people Thai food, showing people Teochew food, because these are cultures that I think don't often have a lot of recognition within the US. And so for me, I actually find that really exciting. I know for some people it's really emotionally laborious and tiring. But I love educating people on it. I love talking about it. And so I find that as a really enriching experience in life. And then I guess last one, is because I'm from small ethnic backgrounds or relatively small within the US, I think the communities that get formed because of that are a lot tighter and a lot stronger because we know there's not that many people that are us. And so the friends I've made through connecting by heritage are a lot stronger than some of the friendships I've made in other different ways because we have a very unique understanding of my mixed identity, my ethnic identities, just different ways of navigating that.
So we've touched on positive. So let's talk about the negatives a little bit. And you kind of brought up little pieces here and there. Are there any issues that you have personally faced regarding diversity and inclusivity in the community?
Yeah, there are so many things to touch on. I think as a Southeast Asian, a default one that has to be brought up is the way that it's difficult to even enter the Asian space. A lot of times I actually don't identify as Asian publicly. Like I will say it, I will fight for Asian things, but I don't personally see myself as Asian sometimes because the stereotypes, some subtle Asian traits kind of thing that a lot of people connect to, just don't apply. And I have no idea what people are talking about. And I think that was really hard to deal with growing up. I saw like nods. I don't know if you have also experienced this. But it was really challenging not feeling Asian enough because, you know, as a kid, especially growing up in the 2000s and 2010s when like Asia YouTube, Asia Tumblr was like everything. I just wasn't part of that. And so that I think was the biggest personal struggle. But that also goes into like institutional issues too, right? Like when they talk about Asian issues like education, they're not including Southeast Asians who don't make it into that sphere. They're not including Southeast Asians who are undocumented. And so, you know, there's not a lot of institutional support for Asian Americans like myself or other Southeast Asians because the assumption is that the support is going to East Asians. And I think that's really hard. That was really, really hard to navigate, especially when I was in college, because I felt like I was having to constantly say, oh, I'm Asian too. And that's tiring to have to assert that. And not only is it tiring, I think it makes me really bitter and makes me, you know, hate the Asian community sometimes. But I don't. Clearly, I do. I love us. I studied us for like 5 years, 6 years. And so there are parts of me that love it, and there are parts of me that don't. And then I think just other personal issues, the colorism within our community. And that goes so many different ways too, right? Because there's colorism within the Asian American community, colorism within the Asian community, and then specific colorism within my own ethnic backgrounds to navigate, which are totally related, but also different in terms of how we think about caste, how we think about religion in terms of these things. I think religion is another one. I constantly was confused. And, you know, I studied English as well. And a lot of English is saying things like biblical backgrounds. And I'm a Buddhist, so I don't understand your stories. So just navigating the small ways that people don't get get included, which I think are really easy to overlook, like not understanding why we have Saturday, Sunday off, because they are not important in my communities, or not understanding, you know, the point of Easter, even though I ran around collecting eggs because that's what everyone did. And so while there were ways that I came to peace with it, I think there were often ways that the lack of inclusion institutionally and then socially, more importantly for me growing up, made me feel like I wasn't able to access a lot of the belonging, and I had to kind of force my way into communities, which sucks.
Yeah, I mean, for you to have those struggles and really see the complexities within our community and kind of the way we function in the greater society as Asians, or even ethnicities within Asia, like it's huge. And like you said, the colorism within your own ethnicity to Southeast Asians versus East Asians to even just being Asians in America. There's so many levels to it. And I want to ask you about your journey going through Asian American studies. How was that? And why did you pursue a degree from bachelor's to even finishing your master's?
Yeah, that is a question I get a lot. So thanks for asking, Josh. I didn't originally want to study Asian Americans. I wanted to study English and go into teaching. And I still want to go into education. But when I was in high school, George Floyd was murdered in 2014. So my junior year of high school, when I was applying to colleges. That really changed the trajectory of my life, because when I saw a lot of people, Black folk in particular, the struggles that they had gone through are still going through, and the ways in which they would change that into, you know, action, empowerment, community building, even as that wasn't institutionally recognized. And so for me, that made me really take a deeper look at what it meant for me to inhabit a body, an identity, multiple identities that sometimes act in violence towards those, and also have histories of that same exclusion, not same, I take that back, of a similar or like affected by similar structures of power. And I think that really pushed me into reconsidering what it meant to even study literature, what it meant to exist. And so I also had a teacher who's taught my Gov Econ class who studied Chicano studies, which is a very specific Mexican-American identity that has its own history within the United States, particularly in California. And so I was lucky enough to know that ethnic studies was an option. I know that a lot of people don't have that, and that's something that we're really working to change. But knowing that ethnic studies was a route and then having that shift in my perception of myself really pushed me into doing Asian American studies. And so I applied to UCI with Asian American studies as my major. There were two of us that had that major in the first incoming class at UCI. So we're still really good friends because it was lonely being like the babies that were in the field. And I think I kept with it because I kept discovering ways in which knowing Asian American history, knowing about Asian American literature, stories, traditions, either upset me because, learning the histories isn't easy. Our histories are violent and are still ongoingly, oppressive and violent. But they're also really inspiring. And I think that Asian American studies gives me, in particular, a way to really change how we see stories. Because I think Asians are really good at talking. We're really good at telling stories, those dinner conversations that go like for 4 or 5 hours and the people at like the hot pot place are trying to kick you out, right? Like we're really good at that. And I see that in so many ways where we know how to tell stories that are, in Hollywood that allow us to communicate who we are. But we also tell stories in, the foods we cook for each other, the ways that we care for each other, the ways that we interact on social media. And those stories have always inspired me to really want to understand the depth of our communities. And so that's what I really pushed for. My undergraduate thesis was looking at poetry as a way of storytelling and resistance, which I think is one way that we don't typically see arts represented, but I think is a very common tradition in, writers of color. And I wanted to bring that into Asian, since oftentimes Asian American literature doesn't get represented or discussed. And then I chose to go into a master's program for really similar reasons. I think I was a little bit more upset at that point about the exclusion of Southeast Asian narratives, the exclusion of undocumented Southeast Asians within narratives, and the way in which the refugee story is told, especially as we are still in the midst of many refugee crises, some here in Orange County themselves. And so I thought it was still relevant to learn those histories to bring them to a better understanding of where we are historically today, even if they're different communities that are being affected.
Mm-hmm. Dang, that's beautiful. That gave me chills, like understanding how we as just people have used art as a means for activism and advocacy, and really highlighting the Asian aspect is chef's kiss. Because I also took Asian American Studies classes too. And like you, similar story where you saw something that outraged you specifically within the Black community. It was like, damn, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this has been happening and it's still going to happen. So how can I, as an individual that identifies as Korean, do my part in trying to understand my culture, my Asian American history, to really learn from that and advocate for people that, and be allies, like just be allies without stepping over each other, understanding like sometimes you need to give up your power so these people can have their power. And how do we use Asian American history or Asian American studies, like maybe from coming from us, how do we teach people the importance of it and how we can use it to advocate for ourselves and the community?
Yeah, I think I'll start with, I think that as the Stop Asian Hate movement has really progressed, which I am, thrilled with seeing people hopping on board, coming to a realization of their own disenfranchisement and then ways that they can really speak up. I've seen a lot of people grasp immediately to history, right? What are our histories? How do we teach our histories as a way to understand our power and understand where we have to go in terms of advocacy? And while I see that as really valuable, I would also argue that there's a better way to approach it, especially in an intergenerational way, which is to really think about our personal histories and our cultural values. And I say that because for me, coming to terms with my identities and learning my own personal history was also a way of understanding interethnic relationships, right? Interethnic power dynamics and ways in which being Chinese Indonesian meant something in Indonesia. Being, my dad being Indonesian and my mom being Cambodian, having different hierarchical positions within the US taught me something about power. And so really connecting with understanding our own story is a really key part. Now, it's obviously not everything. We can't fix the world by understanding our story. But I think dissecting ourselves allows us to better come to terms with what is our positionality, what is our experience, so that we can better understand and have a empathetic positioning with the allies that we want to be in community with, rather than a really sympathetic way of looking at it, which is very, I see that there is an issue, I'm just going to say something. Because when we have a more empathetic route of looking at it, then we're able to say, I see the history that you have, I see the struggles you have, I see how that same history has also disenfranchised me, even if we are not experiencing the same thing. And I'll give an example for that. So, as I mentioned before, education statistics in the Southeast Asian community on people who graduate from high school and go to college are really low. The same is true for the Black community. And a lot of times there's similar histories, right? The colorism that is applied to Asian Americans, Southeast Asian Americans, Cambodian Americans, when they came here to the US, were located within what a scholar who I really recommend you read if you're interested. His name is Eric Tang, what he calls hyper ghettos. So really dense communities that were already inhabited by Black folks that already didn't have funding. They didn't have social work. They didn't have, all these different things. They weren't in, proximity to grocery stores. And so the same issues that are applying to them, even though our histories are different, are also applying to us. And that leads to the same outcome, which is lack of educational attainment. And so, knowing that history of my own personal story allows me to better understand the Black community. And I think that goes for every single Asian community there is, because we all got here different ways and we all have very different connections to the US. And then the second part that I mentioned, which is understanding our cultural values, I think is very similar. I think that activism is a work of love from community. I really see activism and advocacy as people knowing that they deserve better, wanting better for the people that they love, and really pushing for, that right to exist and that right to love and that right to, have joy. I know other people see it differently, but I see it in that very hopeful lens. And I think that bringing the values that we have for my communities or my own personal families, that really important value of family, that really important value of learning from my elders, learning from my aunts and my grandma in the kitchen, right? Knowing that those are ways that we can actually learn from each other as opposed to just lecturing at each other, right? Allows us to better have a stronger community. So the advocacy is more genuine. And the advocacy comes from a place of wanting to uplift each other rather than wanting to just point out things that are wrong and happening, right? And so I think it's a lot more productive when we're able to have that genuine connection to the advocacy work we do, because we're better able to understand ourselves.
Wow. I didn't think about that. I mean, it's like, it's a part of it, right? But when you highlight the importance of kind of understanding oneself to being your history, your experiences, sharing those experiences with other people, and then understanding you can use cultural values as a way to uplift each other, I think is something that people don't really think about. I think right now, you mentioned empathy. I took the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Initiative at UCI too with Dr. Neighbors, but I learned something from one of the groups that we were working with. Like, I feel for you. Like, I genuinely feel the emotions that you're feeling because I've been through something of that sort, even though it's not the same thing. And through that commonality, I think it came like really beautiful relationships and kind of awareness and advocacy for that group. And so how do we, as a society that's very individualistic, I think it's a big question for sure, but I think within Orange County, how can we improve that empathy? What are some of the strategies that we can use as community members?
Yeah, I think some of the big strategies are in education. I think that the initiative to push forward ethnic studies in various cities needs to gain more traction because ethnic studies, to me, is less so about learning the histories, right? Nobody remembers dates and facts. Who does that? But everyone remembers the way that those dates and facts made you feel and the way that learning things about other people made you feel for those people. Like you said, right? You feel their story, even if you don't actually understand it or if it's not your own. And so that's the value in ethnic studies. And I think that is going to radically change Orange County once we get there. But I also see the same thing needing to happen in the way we organize and do, I'll speak from the nonprofit sector, right? The way that we do direct service work, we need to understand people's stories before we try to offer them solutions, right? I am a case manager, and sometimes I'll give a personal example. I did an intake, right, for a client who came to us and was an overseas Filipino worker who had never gotten citizenship or renewed his visa. And so when he was talking about human trafficking, I think someone else who I was in conversation with on my staff was saying something like, oh, we got to connect them to this, we got to connect them to that. And I'm like, no, that's not the issue. The issue is immigration. The issue is this, right? And so really knowing their stories and the histories that are behind those stories changes how we are more effective in our service because we're actually targeting the root problem. And to do that, I think we, as different community-based organizations, just need to be in conversation. We need to understand each other. We need to know each other individually, right? Because it means something different if I have a Korean client who's looking for health service and I'm like, I think KCS is a service. And instead I can say, oh, okay, let me call Josh really quick and see what KCS can offer you, right? And so allowing ourselves to bring that community work into our professional work is really, really core. And I think changing the way that we operate as a community. And I think those small ways of operating are really actually immensely subversive because we're not going to replicate, calling for, a 5150 or a psychiatric emergency that involves police. It might be really scary and dangerous for people. And instead we'll know how to bring in culturally competent care because we're doing that work to be a community in the work we provide.
Yeah,
I hope that answers it.
Yeah, Nikki, exactly what you were saying. I think the point that I really resonated with was that it's a culturally competent way of caring for the community, because once the community sees that you care for them more than just, like you said, not treating the symptoms, but looking at the real issue and looking at them individually. But what I think is super effective too is that your work through OCAPICA, not only are you helping Orange County, but with all the families that you work with, they see the impact very quickly with you just knowing that, oh, Nikki's there for us at the end of the day. So speaking of community and mental health work, you're currently at OCAPICA. Can you tell us more about how you are doing and what projects you have, as well as how you are providing mental health access to Orange County?
Yeah, so I've been with OCAPICA for 2.5 years now. It's a long time. And I've done a variety of things. I worked on the census. I worked on a suicide prevention program with high school students. I did a leadership and identity program. But I think all those experiences took me to where I am now, which is being a case manager. Case management, if I have to sum it up, is basically a way for people to access services knowing their barriers. So what we do as case managers is assess, what are people dealing with? What are the barriers that people are facing so they're not able to access things, whether those are institutional barriers like the cost of healthcare, or if those are personal things like going through a divorce and not having, financial stability from that, or, just being depressed and not having the motivation to look at a psychologist, because that's a challenging and horrible experience. And so what we do is we assess those barriers and figure out ways that we can provide help or guide them through them, right? We can't overcome the barriers when they exist, but we can figure out how to navigate knowing that we have those barriers. So maybe that means encouraging people to look up a resource once a day. Maybe it means teaching people what it means to budget and being realistic about it, right? Not everyone can put away 40% of their paycheck for a retirement fund. But there are little things that everyone can do, how to shop smarter, where to shop, utility assistance programs that exist so that we can take that off their back so they can focus on car payments, right? That's basically what case management is, figuring those things out. And so I think that in terms of my current projects, I don't have projects necessarily as much as I have just cases and people that I work with. But what we are doing within my department right now is trying to pinpoint, service locations in Orange County that we don't always work with. So we're very specific about the zip codes we work in, and we're trying to branch out into zip codes that we don't currently service. We are trying to target more people who live in low-income housing and provide more support for children. A lot of what I do is working with children. I feel like half the week I'm just surrounded by people under 12. And that is because, when we're able to teach kids coping skills, then it breaks that barrier of intergenerational trauma a little bit, right? It's not the only thing, but it allows us to start early. And so really just targeting, low-income housing, areas that we don't service are how we are doing the work currently. And I think that in particular, we get to do that because we're a free resource. A lot of people bill through Medi-Cal, Cal Optima, all these different things, which some people don't have, or some people don't want to use due to histories of abuse, histories of, various things that make them not want to do that. And I have the opportunity because it's a free program that doesn't require citizenship, that doesn't require insurance information, doesn't require any of that. I think people are more able to trust us because they don't have to. I mean, we're still part of the man, but we're like the man's like little brother. And so they don't have to be as scared of us. They don't have to give us as much info. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it answers the question. I think you're right in the way that you guys aren't, the door is always open for people to come through, which is good. And I think that with all of the resources that you have, are there any virtual services that community members can access?
Yeah, most of our services are virtual right now due to the pandemic still happening. And so if you're looking for telehealth counseling, we only do short-term counseling. But if you're looking for that, we have it. If you're looking for virtual case management, we have that. But in terms of, if you just want to foot in or just to learn a little bit more mental health, we actually do have weekly workshops that are available for free on Zoom. No questions asked, really. All you have to do is fill out a form, and you can use your initials and fake everything else if you don't want to. And that's on our website at ocapica.org/workshops. But that resource is free, and anyone is welcome to join in Orange County, even if you live in Central Orange County, which unfortunately we don't service. So cities like Santa Ana or Costa Mesa, unfortunately, we don't provide service for, but you can still join our online workshops.
Mm-hmm. Actually, Nikki, one of the first workshops that I did, you were the person that was hosting it. You were doing like how to foster relationships during the pandemic because everything was virtual. And it was the first one that I went to, and I had the most fun because there were just so many suggestions that you had, like doing presentations, and it's like a baby photo, and then you like guess who it is, or like how to like foster relationships in like games and conversations and just checking up on each other, which I didn't think to do during the pandemic. I kind of felt isolated in that sense, but going through a lot of these workshops, I felt like they always added like a different perspective at the end. So I really encourage, any viewers, if you're interested, they're all free. They happen weekly. A lot of them are like daily as well. So and it's a great resource. You guys have so many things to add, like you said, coping skills, stress management. I remember there was like self-compassion, or like how to deal with self-criticism. So I think in the realm of like social media and us always being on our phones, I think it's like a great resource to have nowadays.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it. We also bring workshops to you too. If you're with an organization or a student group and you want a workshop, we'll do them for free as long as you're within our service region. So feel free to reach out if you want that.
My last question is that going back to mental health, we actually had a guest named Angela come last time, and we were talking about hesitancies, fears, and concerns within the community seeking this type of help. Mm-hmm. So with everything that you've seen at OCAPICA, how have you actually relieved those concerns for people who are unsure about going and seeking help?
Yeah, I think that's a huge barrier, the stigma against mental health and lack of understanding in the community. And I think the most important way that me and my staff are trying to address that right now is changing the language that we use when discussing mental health. This is something I'm super passionate about. You hear this phrase a lot within the Asian American community that Asian Americans don't care about mental health or don't know that mental health exists, right? Usually they're talking about our parents or our grandparents or that whole extended family. Mm-hmm. And I think to a degree that's true. But I also think that it's because we say things like depression and anxiety, which don't translate. They literally don't have words sometimes. And I know in my family, for example, when we talk about PTSD, ways that it comes up is like my mom, my aunts, they have dreams about people for months, years, right? And that's one way that we can talk about PTSD as a recurring, re-traumatizing event. We talk about seeing ghosts, right? And so sometimes when we're talking about mental health access, providers are really, really reaching for, this community doesn't care about suicide prevention. And instead of saying things like suicide prevention, we say, how do we better, protect our youth, right? We kind of couch it in these euphemisms because in my mind, they're not euphemisms. They're actually talking at the level that the community is at. And talking with the language that they're actually using amongst each other. And I think that's one way that we as providers can help. And we're really pushing our staff to do, right? So when we do our intakes, instead of saying things like, do you have, do you have symptoms of anxiety every day? We'll say things like, do you feel like you can't control things and that makes you really upset as you go through the day. And so just changing that language is really, really helpful. And I think makes mental health seem a lot more approachable, especially for older generations. I'd also say something that we're doing is we are very strategic about what communities we go into and how we enter them, right? So sometimes communities don't want us to lecture at them. They don't want us to give a presentation. They want us to be there at the Lunar New Year Festival, just a stall where we, hand out slide or, a paper that mentions ways that you can self-care during the new year and, has luck and prosperity at the bottom. So we're on trend. And I think that is really helpful, right? Being able to immerse ourselves into the community as opposed to try to force our way in to get service has been really, really effective, especially during the pandemic, as I think people are reaching inwards for comfort, right? And they don't necessarily want to go to a fair. So if you bring it to them, I think they're more willing to engage. And so even though we've seen our numbers drop, we also are seeing our numbers increase because we're more able to be culturally competent, one, and to meet our clients where they need that service. So we're going into schools rather than expecting schools to send people to us. We're going into apartment complexes so that people don't have to leave their apartments to get help.
I wanted to ask one question, moving more away from community into the individual. I know you're a huge advocate for mental health. I think the understanding oneself is something that is very profound to you. And I completely feel you. Like, it's something that has changed my whole entire perspective on life, how I move, how I feel, how I think, understanding what's going on with my body. What is my body telling me? What is my head telling me?
Mm-hmm.
Or what are some things that we can do to understand ourselves more? Like, are there resources? Are there kind of strategies you used? Please give us some of your insight on this.
Yeah. I'll mention some of the common big trending ones right now. People are talking about attachment styles. I am not a psychologist. I don't remember the names of the people who wrote these books, but there's a book on attachment styles. I think that's really helpful. I think take everything with a grain of salt, especially when you're doing self-help work, because a lot of self-help work is, how do we get you to be a more productive worker? And I think that's not how self-help works. And it's more about, how do you better understand yourself? And so people talk about the attachment styles book, The Body Keeps Score, is a very popular book right now that is really helpful in thinking about what trauma means and adverse childhood experiences. But I think when you hop off, books as a way to learn, there's a couple different ways that I really approached it and have really helped me. The first one being, I am that weird in between Gen Z and millennial. And so I'm very online. And I think the benefit is I'm on all the online things. So I think limit the amount of Instagram, mental health, self-help things that you follow, but follow them. Find the ones that speak to you and that actually give you those daily reminders. Follow those TikTok accounts by psych students or social work students who are going to really help you think through your own identities and things to help you. Okay. So I really recommend two accounts in particular. I love Therapy Den. They're actually a network of ways that you can link up to therapists that are within a particular line of thinking through restorative healing. So I really recommend that TikTok account. They also have an Instagram and a website. But my favorite TikTok person to follow, especially if you are queer, is, I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's at AXRYNIC. And they are a student who is studying social work right now. And I think they offer really profound ways of looking at, in particular, Asian American existence and mental health. And for me, hearing it from someone else who is also queer, also Asian, is how I've been able to learn. So I think hopping on to my next advice piece would be learn from people that are like you, right? It's kind of hard. I feel like all of us are kind of surrounded by mental health advice all the time, kind of bombards you. And it doesn't necessarily apply sometimes, or it kind of conflicts with what you're able to do. And I think really searching for, they don't have to have the same identities, but similar identities to you is one way to grow, because I think the individual growth process is oftentimes trying to understand what identities you have. And if you're not able to interact with people, even if it's, you interacting with them on social media and they're not necessarily interacting with you, or if it's finding, friendships, clubs, whatever that means, of people with similar identities, learning with those people to understand identity really does change things. And I'll give a personal example too. I remember when I was in college, people were really big on talking about love languages. I think that's still popular. And I was in a Khmer club, and I had a really great discussion with one of my friends, Rokta, who we were talking about love language and the way in which how we see love kind of conflicts with how we talk about love language sometimes, right? Sometimes people say like, oh, physical touch can be shallow, or acts of service. They're talking about, when they say acts of service, it's like, oh, let me go put your mail in the USPS box. Like, it's like things like that, which, yeah, those are helpful. But for me, I was better able to come to terms with what love means as a client person, what love means and how it was expressed to me and how I receive it back, because I understood an act of service instead as a home cooked meal, or as a, when my older sister, reminds me to do something for a holiday. And while that doesn't necessarily seem loving, I think the communication of love through that was something that I always knew existed, but wasn't getting validated in the dominant conversations about how do we reconfigure love? How do we better understand abusive relationships, right? Like, and so really having that cultural approach to understanding even individual things is so helpful, because then you avoid feeling like you don't understand something, or that you'll never understand a part of yourself. And so my final bit to your question, Josh, is when talking about like learning about yourself and self-identity, I think the most important thing for me is I actually have a workshop on this because it's so important, to really think about what influences your self-worth. Self-worth to me is, I think, the most fundamental aspect of really working on your own wellness. And for me, that has been the most helpful, because self-worth is a lot of things, right? It's not only how you see yourself in the workplace, imposter syndrome, all those things. It's also how people have talked about your identities, your interests, right? So I have a Dragon Ball Z tattoo on my back, and I'm planning to get one in Lord of the Rings. Like, I've been the nerdy person, right? And being able to say, okay, people saying that's nerdy, whack. Me loving those things and embracing that nerdiness is not only empowering, because like, yeah, it's cool to like what you like, but it also is a rejection of what is normal. And so I think that's really powerful way of loving yourself and feeling more worthwhile to you. Or, when I never really came out as queer, it kind of just happened, and I just put it on my social media so everyone would know. But, when I really better understood, okay, this is what I find attractive, and maybe that's not dominant, but that's okay. When I was able to deconstruct that about identity, then I'm actually able to myself to say, your attractions are normal. Your, ways of loving people are maybe not necessarily normal, but they are okay and important, and they make you feel really good and cool and happy. And that's really what matters. Yeah, I think that's all the pieces that I have for really developing as an individual.
Nikki, no, thank you so much in engaging in all this like really great conversation and all the tips that you shared. I think are going to be really helpful. And I think it's great to move on to our next thing to transition. It's a little bit more light. It's quick fire. It's this or that questions. There's no wrong or right answer, just maybe a little bit of judgment. The order will be Josh, Sam, Nikki, and then myself. Okay. Number 1, give up social media or have everyone give up social media.
I would have everyone give up social media.
Me too.
Okay. I would just give up I would give up social media myself.
Oh, I would also give up I would also have everyone else give up social media.
It looks like it's going to be a tie. I would give up social media myself. I would do so just because I already am not active on social media. And I feel like that's been so helpful to my mental throughout the years. It's also maybe because I'm getting old, so social media is kind of boring for me now, but that's why I would give up social media. And everybody else is kind of like, all right, you're on your own.
Yeah, I agree. I don't use social media as I don't post. I do use YouTube a lot. So I like to watch vlogs or look up the lyrics, but I feel like I just don't want to make everyone give up if they don't want to give it up. But it would be kind of nice to have people, I guess, I don't want to say go outside. I don't want to say like that, but I don't know, interact with each other in person, but it's hard, definitely.
Nikki, Josh, you guys have anything for why you would like everybody else to give up social media?
Sometimes I like posting because I like reading or looking at the things that I post, not because I want anyone else to see. It's kind of a way that I can journal without journaling. Or put ideas out there so I can remember to say a joke to my housemates who don't use social media. And so if everyone else didn't use it, it's fine because I'm already using it for myself anyway.
Okay. Josh?
Mine is not that deep. I would want, I think it'd be interesting to see how it would have been if we didn't have phones, the 1900s. We would just be vibing. We'd only have 2 friends, know 100 people.
Nobody knows where you are.
Yeah, just live.
That's true.
Actually, yeah. Oh, that's a good reason. All right. Okay. Number 2, lose all the money you've earned this year or lose all the memories you've gained this year, meaning 2021. All right. I'll repeat it again. Lose all the money you've earned this year or lose all the memories you've gained this year.
I would lose all the money. It's not money's even an issue in our current times, current fields. so it's all good.
Okay, I think I would do the same, lose all the money, because I just want to keep the memories. I feel like that's a whole year.
I'm torn because I didn't make that many memories in 2021 because pandemic. But I think money, because then I can go retreat and live under my mom's house. But I will, if I didn't have the memories, then I wouldn't remember the friends that I made.
I'm with you guys. I would lose all the money I've earned this year, which isn't a lot, but memories to last a lifetime. All right. Number 3. Work a high-paying job that you hate or dream job with only enough money for basic necessities.
I don't even really know. I'm torn. At least my position right now, I think I don't mind a job that I would hate because it's just 8 hours a day. Enjoy my weekends, nights. But then dream job and just live in a shack and not worry about anything else, I wouldn't mind that either. So I guess I'll pick the dream job.
That's hard because, okay, I would say if I can consider a mansion a basic necessity. No, I don't know. Because I think it's hard though. If you hate your job and you go every day and it's for years, I would be so burnt out. year one. So I don't know about the high paying job. I definitely think I could do the dream job with money for basic necessities. Because basic necessities, I'm thinking like, oh, you know, food, rent, utilities, phone. Like, I feel like that's a good amount of money. So if I have enough money for all of that, I think I'll be okay. And that, and if I feel fulfilled, I think that's the biggest part. If I feel fulfilled at the end of the day, I feel like I wouldn't mind it for sure. And I mean, if anything, I'm going to mooch off of my friends, you know, and be like, hey, do you mind? I can borrow your, like, I don't know, Wi-Fi or something. And if they're a good friend, they'll say yeah. So
I think if you ask me in 3 years when I have no more debt, hopefully, then I would pick dream job. But I have debt and I have bills to pay. And so I kind of rather make a ton of money so I can get to a point where I can save to be happy and then go work a dream job that's not going to pay me. I mean,
That's a good middle answer. I was going to say dream job with only enough money for basic necessities and then just do a bunch of side hustles.
oh,
I don't know,
I like that.
I would somehow
start an
make
Etsy shop.
basic necessities include like my hair and eyelash appointments.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Bruh.
I'd work that in somewhere. I'd write that in my
Who needs
contract.
to eat?
that could be part of your job. Like, oh, you
Yeah.
have to be presentable. So it's like part of your basic necessity. I'm
Yeah.
sure you could.
I mean, who's to say it's not?
Exactly. All right. Number 4. Sorry, this one's gonna have a lot of mediocre friends or only one really good friend.
I would do, I mean, like all one good friend is cool. Like my circle is already like pretty tight anyways. Having 1,000 friends seems like it's a lot of work because I don't have the patience to deal with people that are mediocre, unfortunately. But it's like we'll be cool, but I just will only see once every decade or so.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. I would do one really good friend because I can't hang out with all of everyone. I think that's too much. But I also think like having one really good friend I can rely on, I feel like it just makes it more meaningful to me. So, yeah. What about you, Nikki?
I'd also say one really good friend, kind of for the same reason, Sam. I go out like once a week and I'm tired. Like, I don't want to see people for the rest of like the month. And I can adopt as many like animals as I want in the situation. So like in theory, I will have more friends.
Okay.
They can't talk to me, but it's okay.
And that you have to feed them every day.
You know, it's fine. They pay me in companionship.
With her high-paying job.
Yeah. With my dream job in a mansion that you can stay at. It's okay, Sam.
I'm going to go with only one really good friend for all the reasons you guys said. Number 5, last one. Save 3 of your closest family members or 1,000 people you don't know.
Oh.
This is a real moral question.
Yeah.
And we all work in healthcare. So what's the answer?
Oh.
Everybody dies. No, honestly, we had this conversation earlier, but I was like, I would pick family, but in that situation, like I'm seeing it coming, I would probably do the 1,000 people and then just forget about it.
Okay. I was gonna say I would save the 1,000 people because I could choose. Could I choose how they die? Like,
Nope.
I was like,
Why are you trying to
I'm thinking that, like, okay, if I can choose them, I could wait until like when they're 90 or something, and I'll be like, okay, I think your time is up, and then like they'll be like, oh, okay, you can, you know, like you can choose when they die and how they die. So it's like, oh, I just want to go to sleep, and then that's it, and then like kind of like give them a peaceful type of death. But 1,000 people, that's a lot of people that you're affecting, because like they have families, they have jobs. Like I'm thinking like, let's say all 1,000 people, they work in like us, like healthcare, you're out 1,000 people, you know, and it takes time to recuperate from that, even though they're random. Like, I don't know how you're going to find 1,000 people, but yeah, I think that's the biggest one, because I feel like I'll be affecting so many more people's lives. But if it's 3 and I can pick them, yeah, I'll wait and kill them later.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I would also save 1,000 people. I hope my family members know that I love them, but like respectfully, they have to die in this situation.
Oh. Respectfully, okay.
There are some other people who need it, namely 997,000 or 100 other people.
Yeah. No, this one was hard for me just because family is everything to me. But for the greater good, I guess it's the 1,000. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be the bad guy.
But they're your closest. Like, imagine your closest people dying. That's hard for sure.
I'm gonna just.
Thank you, Nikki, for joining us for this episode. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to just come and talk to us and have a really nice conversation and give us insight on identity, allyship, and mental health. Is there anything you'd like to plug? Anything we should look out for in these upcoming days, weeks, months?
Please check out our virtual workshops if you have not. Enjoy some sunshine and eat some good food. Life's too short to not eat good food.
Mm-hmm.
True. All right, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this episode of OC Hues. Please follow us on Instagram at OC_Hues and like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. See you all next time.